Late one quiet night, a man named Armin sat alone in the living room of his small house. The only light came from a dim lamp in the corner, casting long shadows across the walls. His wife, Sarah, had been acting strange for the past few weeks, and he couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling growing inside his chest. Every night around midnight, Sarah would suddenly become secretive. She would take her phone and walk into another room, whispering so softly that Armin could barely hear her voice. Whenever he asked who she was talking to, she would quickly end the call and say it was just a friend. At first, Armin tried to ignore it. He trusted his wife and didn't want to believe anything was wrong. But the strange behavior continued. Sarah started staying up later than usual, sometimes staring at her phone with a faint smile that Armin had never seen before. That night, something felt different. As the clock slowly ticked toward midnight, Armin pretended to be asleep on the couch. From the corner of his eye, he watched Sarah quietly walk into the kitchen with her phone. Moments later, he heard the faint sound of whispering again. But this time, her voice sounded different, almost nervous, yet strangely excited. Armin slowly stood up and walked closer to the kitchen door, careful not to make a sound. As he listened, he realized Sarah wasn't speaking normally. Her words sounded strange, almost like a language he had never heard before. Then suddenly, Sarah stopped talking and looked toward the dark hallway. For a brief moment, Armin felt a cold chill run down his spine, because it felt like someone else in the house had just noticed him listening. Armin quickly stepped back into the darkness of the hallway, his heart pounding loudly in his chest. For a moment, the entire house became silent. Sarah had stopped whispering on the phone, and the strange feeling in the air made Armin's skin crawl. He waited a few seconds, trying to control his breathing. Then he carefully looked toward the kitchen again. Sarah was standing completely still. Her back was facing him, but her head was slightly tilted, as if she was listening to something or someone. The dim kitchen light flickered above her, making the shadows move unnaturally across the walls. "Hello," Sarah suddenly said softly, but her voice sounded different, cold and distant. Armin froze. She wasn't speaking to him. A few seconds later, she slowly raised the phone back to her ear and began whispering again. But this time her words sounded even stranger. It wasn't a normal conversation anymore. It sounded more like she was repeating strange phrases again and again. Armin could only catch a few words. Tonight, midnight, the old place. His heart sank. Who was she meeting at midnight? A terrible thought suddenly entered his mind. What if Sarah was meeting another man? The idea made his chest burn with anger and betrayal. Armin quietly stepped back into the living room and pretended to lie down again before Sarah could see him. A minute later, she walked past him, thinking he was asleep. But Armin kept his eyes slightly open. He watched as Sarah slowly put on her coat and quietly unlocked the front door. Without making a sound, she stepped outside into the dark street. Armin waited a few seconds, then silently stood up. Whatever secret Sarah was hiding tonight, he was finally going to discover the truth. And deep inside, he had a terrifying feeling that he might regret following her. Armin quietly opened the front door and stepped outside into the cold night air. The street was almost completely silent. A thin fog covered the road, and the yellow streetlights flickered weakly in the distance. Ahead of him, he could see Sarah walking quickly down the empty street. She kept looking around nervously, as if she didn't want anyone to see her. Armin stayed far behind her, carefully hiding in the shadows. His heart was racing, and 1,000 thoughts were running through his mind. Was she really meeting someone? The idea of betrayal burned inside him. But something about tonight felt even more disturbing. Sarah wasn't walking toward the busy part of town. Instead, she was heading toward the old industrial area where most buildings had been abandoned for years. The fog grew thicker as they moved deeper into the dark streets. Finally, Sarah stopped in front of a large, crumbling building. Its broken windows looked like dark, empty eyes staring into the night. Rust covered the metal gates, and the sign above the door was barely hanging. Armin felt a chill run down his spine. Everyone in the neighborhood knew about this place. People said strange things happened there at night. Some even believed the building was haunted. Sarah slowly pushed the broken gate open. The metal creaked loudly in the silence. She looked around once more, then stepped inside the abandoned building. Armin stood frozen across the street, staring at the dark entrance. His mind screamed that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't a normal meeting. Taking a deep breath, he slowly walked toward the building. The gate moved slightly in the wind as he stepped through it. The moment he crossed inside, the cold air felt heavier. And somewhere deep inside the building, he heard a quiet laugh echo through the darkness. Ghost. Armin slowly stepped inside the abandoned building, his footsteps echoing softly on the cracked floor. The air inside felt cold and heavy, as if the place had been empty for many years. Dust covered everything, and pieces of broken glass crunched under his shoes. The faint light from outside barely reached the hallway. Most of the building was swallowed by darkness. For a moment, Armin hesitated. Every instinct inside him was telling him to turn around and leave. But the thought of Sarah meeting someone here pushed him forward. He walked deeper into the hallway, trying to stay quiet. The walls were old and stained, and strange symbols were scratched into the paint. The ceiling lights above were broken, hanging by loose wires. Every few seconds, the wind outside pushed through the broken windows, creating a low whistling sound that echoed through the building. Then suddenly, he heard Sarah's voice again. A soft laugh floated through the dark corridor. Armin stopped moving. The sound was coming from a room at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly open, and a faint flickering light was shining through the gap. His heart began pounding harder as he slowly moved closer. As he reached the door, he carefully looked through the small opening. Inside the room, Sarah was standing in the center of the floor. Several candles were burning around her in a strange circle, their flames shaking as if disturbed by an unseen wind. Shadows danced wildly across the walls. But Sarah wasn't alone. Someone else was standing in front of her. The figure was tall and thin, completely covered in darkness. Armin couldn't see the person's face clearly. At first, anger rushed through him. He thought he had caught Sarah cheating. But then the figure slowly moved closer to the candlelight. And Armin realized something terrifying. The shadow on the floor did not look human. Armin's breath became heavy as he stared through the small crack in the door. The candlelight inside the room flickered wildly, making the shadows on the walls twist and stretch in unnatural ways. Sarah stood calmly inside the strange circle of candles, her face glowing in the dim light. But the tall figure standing in front of her remained mostly hidden in darkness. Armin narrowed his eyes, trying to see the person's face. At first, he thought it was simply another man. His anger slowly turned into rage as the painful thought of betrayal filled his mind. But something felt wrong. Very wrong. The shadow of the figure on the floor didn't match the shape of a human body. It moved strangely, bending and stretching like smoke. Sometimes it looked tall and thin, and sometimes it seemed to grow larger, touching the walls of the room. Armin felt a cold wave of fear run down his spine. Inside the room, Sarah suddenly spoke. "You came, just like you promised," she said softly. Her voice sounded calm, but there was a strange excitement in it. The dark figure slowly leaned closer to her. For a moment, its face moved near the candlelight, but Armin still couldn't see any clear features. It was like looking at a shape made entirely of shadows. Then a deep, unnatural voice filled the room. "Yes, I always keep my promises." The voice sounded distorted, almost like several voices speaking at the same time. Armin's hands began to shake. This was not another man. This was something else. Something unnatural. Sarah slowly reached out her hand toward the shadow figure, as if greeting it like an old friend. The creature raised its long arm to touch her hand. And the moment their hands almost met, every candle in the room suddenly burned brighter. For a split second, the light revealed the creature's face. And Armin nearly screamed in horror. "Ghost!" Armin quickly covered his mouth to stop himself from screaming. His entire body froze as he stared through the crack in the door. For that brief moment when the candles flared brighter, he had seen the creature's face. But it wasn't a normal face. Its skin looked pale and stretched, almost like something wearing a human mask. Its eyes were completely black, with no white at all. And its mouth was too wide, stretching unnaturally across its face in a slow, disturbing smile. The candlelight dimmed again, hiding most of the creature's features in shadow. Inside the room, Sarah didn't look afraid at all. In fact, she looked happy. Armin's heart pounded painfully in his chest as he listened. "Did you bring what I asked for?" Sarah whispered. The shadow creature slowly tilted its head, its movements stiff and unnatural. "Yes," the creature replied in its deep, echoing voice. But every gift has a price. Sarah nodded slowly, as if she had already expected that answer. I'm ready, she said without hesitation. Armin's confusion grew even stronger. What was she talking about? What kind of deal was she making with this thing? The creature slowly lifted its long arm and pointed toward the candles forming the circle around Sarah. The flames suddenly turned dark blue. A cold wind rushed through the room even though the windows were closed. Papers on the floor began sliding across the ground, and the candle flames stretched upward unnaturally. Sarah then began whispering strange words again. This time the language sounded even darker, almost ancient. Armin could feel the air around him becoming colder with every second. Something terrible was happening inside that room. And deep down, Armin had the horrifying feeling that whatever Sarah had invited into this world was not planning to leave. Ghost. Armin pressed his eye closer to the crack in the door, barely breathing as he watched the terrifying scene unfold inside the room. Sarah continued whispering the strange words while standing inside the circle of candles. Her voice slowly became louder, and the strange language echoed across the dusty walls of the abandoned building. The dark blue flames flickered violently. The shadow creature remained standing in front of her, completely still. Its tall body seemed to stretch toward the ceiling, and the darkness around it moved like living smoke. Armin could feel fear crawling under his skin. He wanted to run away, but his legs refused to move. Inside the room, Sarah suddenly stopped chanting. The silence that followed felt even more frightening. The creature slowly spoke again. "Why did you call me?" Its deep voice echoed. Sarah lifted her head and looked directly at the creature. "I want a new life," she said quietly. Armin felt his chest tighten. "What do you mean?" the creature asked. Sarah took a deep breath before answering. "I'm tired of my husband. He is weak. He is boring. I want someone stronger, someone powerful." Armin's heart felt like it had shattered. The woman he loved was speaking about him like he meant nothing. But the creature didn't laugh or react the way a normal person would. Instead, it slowly stepped closer to her. "And what will you give me in return?" it asked. Sarah looked down at the candle circle for a moment, then slowly smiled. "You can take him," she said calmly. "Take his life, and take his place." Armin's blood turned cold. His mind struggled to understand what he had just heard. His own wife had just offered him to a monster. And the creature slowly began to laugh. "Ghost." The creature's laughter filled the room like a dark echo bouncing off the cracked walls. It was a deep, unnatural sound that made Armin's stomach twist with fear. From the hallway, Armin felt his legs grow weak. His mind struggled to understand what he had just heard. Sarah had offered him to the creature. Inside the candle circle, Sarah stood calmly, watching the tall shadow figure as if she were waiting for its answer. The blue flames of the candles flickered around her, making her face look pale and strange. The creature slowly leaned closer to her. "You are willing to give your husband's life, just for power?" it asked in a low voice. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes," she replied. Armin felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something inside him had broken. Every memory of their life together flashed through his mind. Their wedding, the small happy moments, the promises they had made. And now she was trading his life like it meant nothing. The creature slowly raised its long arm and touched Sarah's forehead with its thin fingers. "Very well," it whispered. Suddenly the candles burned brighter again, and the strange symbols on the walls began to glow faintly. A powerful cold wind rushed through the room, making the door shake slightly where Armin was hiding. The creature then turned its head slowly toward the door, toward Armin. His heart stopped. There was no way it could see him. The room was dark, and he had been quiet the entire time. But the creature's black eyes seemed to stare directly into the hallway. Then its wide smile slowly grew bigger. "I can smell him," the creature whispered softly. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "Is he here?" she asked. And before Armin could move, the door slowly began to open by itself. "Ghost." The door creaked loudly as it slowly opened on its own. Armin's heart pounded violently as the darkness of the hallway was suddenly exposed to the flickering candlelight inside the room. For a moment, no one moved. Sarah turned toward the doorway, and her eyes met Armin's. Shock appeared on her face. "Armin?" she whispered. Armin stood frozen in the doorway, his mind spinning with anger, fear, and heartbreak. The woman he loved had just tried to trade his life to a monster. "How could you?" he said with a trembling voice. Sarah looked nervous for a moment, but something strange happened. Instead of apologizing or looking guilty, her expression slowly changed. Her fear disappeared, and a cold smile replaced it. "You weren't supposed to see this," she said quietly. Behind her, the tall shadow creature slowly stepped forward, its long body rising higher as if it enjoyed the tension in the room. Armin backed away slightly, his eyes locked on the creature. "What is that thing?" he shouted. Sarah calmly stepped out of the candle circle and stood beside the creature. "This is my future," she said. Armin shook his head in disbelief. "You're insane. That thing is a monster." The creature tilted its head slowly, watching Armin like a predator watching trapped prey. "Monster," it repeated in its deep voice. Then it slowly began walking toward Armin. Its movements were slow but terrifyingly smooth. Sarah crossed her arms and watched silently. "I told you," she said coldly. "He's weak." Armin felt the cold air growing heavier with every step the creature took. "Don't worry," the creature whispered with its wide, unnatural smile. "This will be quick." And as it stepped into the candlelight, something even more horrifying began to happen. Its face was slowly starting to change. "Ghost." Armin stared in horror as the creature stepped closer into the flickering candlelight. Its shadow stretched across the floor like a living thing, twisting and bending in unnatural ways. Then the transformation began. The creature's pale face started to move, as if something beneath its skin was shifting. The wide, unnatural smile slowly faded as its features began to change. Armin's breath caught in his throat. The creature's nose reshaped. Its jaw tightened. Its cheekbones slowly moved. Within seconds, the face staring back at him began to look familiar. Too familiar. Armin felt his entire body go cold as he realized what was happening. The creature was becoming him. His own face slowly formed on the monster's head, perfectly copying every detail. His eyes, his hair, even the small scar above his eyebrow. But the eyes remained wrong. Completely black. Sarah watched the transformation with excitement in her eyes. "Yes, perfect," she whispered. Armin shook his head in disbelief and stepped back. "No, this can't be real," he said. The creature, now wearing Armin's exact face, smiled slowly. Its lips moved, but the voice that came out was still deep and unnatural. "Your wife asked for a stronger husband," it said, "and I always honor my deals." Sarah stepped closer to the creature and gently held its arm, as if it truly belonged to her. "You'll live a much better life now," she told the creature. Armin felt trapped, surrounded by darkness and betrayal. "What about me?" he demanded. The creature turned its black eyes toward him and smiled wider. "You," it whispered. Then it slowly pointed toward the dark staircase leading down into the basement of the abandoned building. "You will simply disappear." And before Armin could run, the creature suddenly moved. "Ghost." Before Armin could even react, the creature suddenly moved with terrifying speed. In a single second, it appeared right in front of him. Armin barely had time to scream before the creature grabbed him by the throat with its long, icy fingers. Its grip was impossibly strong, lifting him slightly off the ground. Armin struggled desperately, trying to break free, but it was useless. The creature's strength was far beyond anything human. Its black eyes stared directly into his. "Your life belongs to me now," it whispered. Sarah watched the scene without emotion. She stood calmly beside the candle circle, as if everything happening was part of a simple plan. Armin looked at her, his eyes filled with pain and disbelief. "Sarah, please," he choked, barely able to breathe. "Don't do this." For a brief moment, Sarah's face showed a hint of hesitation, but it disappeared quickly. "You were never enough for me," she said coldly. Armin felt his heart shatter. The creature then dragged him across the dusty floor toward the dark staircase at the end of the hallway. The door to the basement slowly creaked open as if it had been waiting. Cold air rose from the darkness below. Armin kicked and struggled, trying to hold onto the door frame, the walls, anything that could stop him from being taken. But the creature easily pulled him down the stairs. The deeper they went, the darker the basement became. At the bottom, Armin saw something horrifying. Chains were hanging from the walls. Old symbols were carved into the floor. This place had been used for something terrible long before tonight. The creature forced Armin onto the cold ground and locked heavy chains around his wrists. Armin shouted for help, but no one could hear him. Above him, The creature slowly smiled. Now, it whispered, your life begins in the shadows while I take your place, ghost. Armin struggled against the heavy chains wrapped tightly around his wrists. The cold metal cut into his skin as he tried desperately to break free, but the chains were too strong. The basement was dark and damp. Water slowly dripped from the cracked ceiling, and the air smelled old and rotten. Strange symbols were carved all over the walls, glowing faintly in the darkness. Armin's breathing became faster as panic filled his chest. Let me go, he shouted toward the staircase. But the creature only stood there at the top of the stairs, calmly watching him. Now it looked exactly like Armin. The same face, the same body, the same voice. Only the eyes were different, completely black, like empty holes filled with darkness. Sarah slowly walked down the stairs and stood beside the creature. She looked at the chained Armin with a cold expression, as if he were nothing more than a stranger. Armin stared at her in disbelief. How can you do this? He asked with a broken voice. Sarah sighed quietly. You never understood me, she said. You were weak, ordinary, boring. She then turned toward the creature, the false Armin, and gently touched his arm. But now everything will be different. The creature smiled with Armin's face. Soon no one will remember the real you, it said softly. Armin felt tears of anger and despair fill his eyes. You won't get away with this, he shouted. But the creature simply laughed. It slowly stepped closer to him and knelt down. With a cold finger, it touched Armin's forehead. A sudden wave of freezing darkness rushed through Armin's body. His strength slowly began fading. His voice became weaker. His vision blurred as the creature whispered one final sentence. From tonight, you exist only in the dark, ghost. Armin collapsed weakly against the cold basement wall. The strange energy the creature had released into his body made him feel weaker with every passing second. His arms hung helplessly in the chains, and his breathing became slow and heavy. Above him, the creature slowly stood up, still wearing Armin's exact face. It looked down at him with a calm, satisfied smile. Sarah watched quietly from the stairs. Is it done? She asked. The creature nodded slowly. Yes, it replied. His strength will fade soon. He will remain alive, but powerless. Armin tried to lift his head, forcing himself to speak. Why? Keep me alive, he whispered painfully. The creature's black eyes stared into his. Because suffering is far more interesting than death, it answered. Sarah didn't seem bothered by the cruel answer. Instead, she looked at the creature proudly, as if she had made the right choice. The creature then walked toward a small broken mirror hanging on the basement wall. It carefully examined its new face. Armin's face. It slowly moved its hands across its cheeks, adjusting its expression, learning how to smile exactly the way Armin used to. Perfect, it said quietly. Sarah smiled as well. Tomorrow, everyone will believe you're my husband, she said. The creature turned to her. And no one will ever suspect the truth. Armin felt anger burning inside him despite his weakness. You can't pretend forever, he shouted weakly. But the creature only laughed again. It walked toward the stairs and stood beside Sarah. Before leaving, it turned back toward Armin one last time. In time, it said calmly, even you will begin to forget who you were. Then the basement door slowly slammed shut. Darkness swallowed the room, and Armin was left alone in the cold silence, trapped in the shadows of his own stolen life. Ghost. The heavy basement door slammed shut with a loud bang, and darkness swallowed the entire room. Armin sat chained to the cold wall, breathing heavily as the silence around him grew deeper. The only sound left was the slow dripping of water from the ceiling. Hours passed, or maybe days. Armin couldn't tell anymore. There was no light in the basement, no window, no way to know how much time had gone by. His body felt weaker with every passing moment, just as the creature had promised. Above him, the creature had already taken his place. Somewhere in the city, people were seeing his face, hearing his voice, believing he was still living his normal life. But it wasn't him. It was the monster. Armin closed his eyes tightly, trying not to lose hope. Maybe someone would notice something strange. Maybe someone would realize that the man walking around in his body was not really him. But deep down, he knew the truth. The creature had learned everything about him. His voice, his behavior, even the way he smiled. No one would suspect anything. Suddenly, Armin heard faint footsteps above the basement. His heart jumped with hope. "Sarah," he shouted weakly. For a moment, the footsteps stopped. Then the basement door slowly creaked open. A small beam of light entered the dark room. Armin looked up desperately. The creature stood in the doorway, still wearing Armin's face. Sarah stood behind it. They both looked down at him like he was nothing more than a prisoner. The creature slowly smiled. "I just came to thank you," it said softly. "Thanks to you, I now have a perfect life." And with that, the door slowly began to close again, leaving Armin in darkness once more. Ghost. Days slowly turned into weeks. Armin remained chained in the dark basement, growing weaker with every passing day. The cold floor beneath him felt like ice, and the silence of the abandoned building slowly began to drive him toward madness. Sometimes he heard footsteps above him. Sometimes he heard laughter. Each time the basement door opened, it was always the same terrifying sight. The creature, wearing his face, and Sarah standing beside it. The creature had perfectly taken over Armin's life. It had learned how to speak like him, walk like him, and even smile the same way. To everyone outside, nothing had changed. Neighbors greeted him normally. Friends talked to him like always. No one suspected that the real Armin was trapped beneath the building. One night, the basement door opened again. Armin slowly lifted his head, his body barely able to move anymore. The creature walked down the stairs calmly. Sarah stayed at the top of the stairs, watching silently. The creature stopped in front of Armin and crouched down. Its black eyes stared into his. "You know what the most interesting part of this is?" it asked quietly. Armin didn't answer. The creature smiled with his own face. "Soon, people will forget the man you used to be." It leaned closer to him and whispered softly. "Memories fade. Faces change. Life moves on." Then it stood up and began walking back toward the stairs. Armin gathered the last bit of strength in his body and shouted into the darkness, "I'm still alive." But the creature only laughed. The basement door slowly closed for the final time. And in the darkness, Armin finally realized the most terrifying truth of all. The world above had already accepted the monster as him.